And we are live. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Blueprints for Freedom. My name is Alyssa Marie, Director of Programs at Citywide, and your co host, Timo.
Hey y'all, I'm Timo, the Executive Director over at Citywide Youth Coalition. How you doing?
Awesome. Today, we are talking about surviving the storm, environmental justice in the age of massive rollbacks. In this episode, we are joined by our amazing guest, Adrian Huq, to explore the disproportionate impact of climate change on Black and Brown communities. We'll begin with local experiences in New Haven and talking about local policies, what's happening here on the ground directly. Then we'll expand to national policy changes under the Trump administration and a lot of the Doge cuts that we have been seeing over the last 3 months. After that, we'll discuss global environmental injustices, talk about the impact of genocide and war when it comes to climate change. And then we'll highlight how frontline communities are not only surviving environmental racism, but leading the charge forward toward ecological liberation and collective care.
Awesome. That sounds exciting. I'm really excited to kind of dive deeper into a lot of these conversations and topics. I think sometimes, especially that war one, right? We really don't have a lot of spaces to talk about that and really think about how war directly impacts climate and how it impacts the people around folks generations after bombs have been dropped, right? Um, you want me to do the introduction?
Yes,
And
please.
all right. So, Adrian is a master's student at Yale School of the Environment, a 2024 graduate of Tufts University, and a proud graduate of New Haven Public Schools. Let's go. Right. A youth climate organizer, Adrian serves as the co founder of the New Haven Climate Movement Youth Action Team, established in 2019, which pushes for bold policy changes at the city levels to address climate change. Adrian currently serves as NHCM's Decarbonize the Oceans Internship and the Climate Justice Schools Initiative, a point program between NHCM and New Haven Public Schools. They also serve as youth coordinator of the Climate Health Education Project from 2018 to 2024, where Adrian co-led an internship program supporting local high school students in advancing energy efficiency and climate education in their school communities. Adrian been doing it like for a minute, right? Um, so Adrian has worked at multiple environmental organizations such as Sustainable CT and is currently an intern at the Urban Resource Initiative. They serve on the board of the Greater New Haven Green Fund and as a subcommittee member of the Connecticut Equity and Environmental Justice Advisory Council. Ooh, that's a mouthful. Adrian has spoken at over 50 climate-related events and rallies across Connecticut. Like after that, like obviously it is our pleasure and honor to welcome Adrian with us today. Thank you so much. I feel like that like is definitely a hand clap. Uh, right, we are definitely honored to have Adrian with us today. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great. I know that bio was a mouthful. There's a lot of acronyms and long organization names out there, but yeah, I'm really happy to be in conversation with you all. And as just a longtime supporter of Citywide, I'm happy to be sharing space with you on this podcast.
So excited to have you here. So we want to get started talking a bit about you, your work at New Haven Climate Change. So we'd love to hear about how you got to climate change organizing to begin with, what really brought that as a passion for you, and then talk to us a bit more about New Haven Climate Change Movement.
Yeah, of course. So I guess my origin story I would say definitely started as a child. I had like a lot of interest in like waste, especially food waste and recycling, which was, I guess, a little odd for a child to be concerned about. But I saw how basically like practices in my family with like very diligent recycling and reusing by my parents, and then going to school and out in the world and seeing something totally different that created like a first dissonance surrounding waste. And so in middle school and high school, I would talk to my teachers about like diverting food waste, setting up ways that we could do like snack shares for the food that we didn't eat, and like taking home my friends' recyclables because our schools weren't recycling and still aren't in New Haven public schools, but we're working on that. So that was, I guess, my first environmental awakening, and climate change came a little bit later, but the first sort of like push I got into other environmental interests was when I was a junior at Metropolitan Business Academy. We had a guest speaker come in from the New Haven Lyon Sister City Project, who I'm now employed by. But their director, Chris, came to talk about, just to ask what we knew about climate change, and talked about how it's affecting people here and in Nicaragua. And he spoke to my science teacher afterwards, saying that he's looking for an intern to educate others about energy efficiency. And so I shot my shot and I got the role, and it was definitely a really great learning experience for me, learning as I went along in this youth leadership role, telling people in my school, whether that's students or teachers, how energy saving practices in their home can help them save money, but also help the environment. And then through that, after a year of that, Chris introduced me to New Haven Climate Movement, which was predominantly an adult organization then. Youth were not involved yet, and it was more of a loose coalition-based organization. So when he asked me to help prepare a youth-led climate rally in 2019, I said yes, and it's been history since then, as we co-founded the youth team. And then that energy efficiency work transformed into climate education work, and I'm happy to still be supervising those interns today.
That is so amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us. Could you talk to us a bit about the campaigns that New Haven Climate Change is currently running, and what are the impacts that you're looking to achieve?
Of course, yeah. So for New Haven Climate Movement, we have several different campaigns, and these priorities shift year to year. But right now we have a really big push for our Transportation Transformation Resolution, which we're currently putting forth by the New Haven Board of Alders. And it's seeking for the alders to commit to trying to cut more greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector. And what does that look like in practice? It can be basically creating safer streets for our pedestrians and bikers, supporting things like free bus passes, which has been a big interest to us and of course many other New Haven residents, and overall striving to make and shift New Haven's transportation system to be less car-centric, because it's inequitable and it's also an environmental harm. So really seeking to sort of transform the transformation system here in New Haven. So that's been a big priority. And also, in addition to our work that targets the city, we also target the New Haven Board of Education. So we've had ongoing campaigns pushing for them to not only incorporate climate education into curriculum, but also for their own district to step up with sustainable operations like electric school buses, more local sustainable food. There's a big interest by our students in like composting and recycling projects happening in schools. So yeah, I would say, to summarize, a lot of different policies and investments that we can push either towards New Haven City Hall or the Board of Education, frequently targeting the mayor, the Board of Alders, or the Board of Education, and striving to have co-benefits as well, for ways that we can both help the residents of New Haven while also having a positive environmental impact.
Well, that sounds really good. So, Adrian, I know, so I'm also a graduate of New Haven Public School Systems. And I know for me, right, like I got into a lot of organizing and activism work kind of similarly to you, right? It started with environmental justice. But back when I was like 5. But I know going to school, I didn't learn too much about, climate justice, climate change, the shifts of things that are going on. When you were in school, like what are things that you actually learned about climate justice? And I know you said you all are working for the campaign. What does that kind of look like? Like, what are we learning now, and what do you want folks to learn in schools?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question, and also something that I sort of think about in terms of, what if I was never introduced to these organizations and these people? Would I be on the same track that I am now? And the answer is probably no, because yeah, as you just mentioned, like climate education isn't really something that comes up in our classes. I know in the ninth grade curriculum, and that continues today, to have a portion about like greenhouse gas effect and sort of some base level things about climate change, and then it kind of just like fades off. And even though that was like several years ago now for me, even the high schoolers that I organize with today say in their classes they're not really hearing much about climate change. And yeah, even as I took on that internship when I was a junior and a senior, like I didn't really know about climate change, but I decided to take a leap on this energy efficiency work because I thought it sounded interesting and it's still in the environmental field. But certainly most of the things I learned about climate change came from outside the classroom, being in community with movement elders and people from other organizations and doing the work, and along the way learning through different articles and other people's speeches about this. So I do think there was definitely a gap in terms of what we learned in the classroom. And yeah, also places like Citywide doing the undoing racism training with you all, like that was really helpful. I remember just doing a lot of different like social justice sort of camps and workshops in high school, and that also in my head helped me piece together what is climate justice. So I feel like it was a culmination of things and events that led to like my political education, but I wish there could have been more of that in classes.
And we need that in the classroom, right? When we talk about culturally relevant pedagogy, this is part of it, right? And it's needed in our classrooms. So could we? I want to get us to talking about what has happened the last 3 months, right?
So
And
many things.
the roller coaster that it hasn't officially been the 100 days already. The first 100 days, I think we've already hit that. Yeah,
We hit 100 days when, like yesterday?
something like that. So let's talk about what have been sort of the greatest hits to climate justice in this country in the last 90 days, um, and talk about how we got here. And then we'll talk about how those federal changes are impacting grant money and programs here locally. Oh, okay. So what we do know is that Trump very famously, and especially in places like Pennsylvania, ran on the agenda of drill, baby, drill. And we know that in places like Pennsylvania, like fracking is a very big conversation and a big topic. And we know how harmful fracking is to our communities and to our climate. Um, and I think if I'm not mistaken, like 2 days ago, Trump had just had that big executive order signing in his office with all the big oil execs talking about how they all made a lot of money during the Black Market Monday that we almost had the other day. um, but Adrian, could you talk to me a bit about sort of what are some of the impacts that we're seeing already, whether federally or here locally?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, you touched on some really key ones. Definitely like a huge support for the fossil fuel industry and continued and expanded drilling, but also a lot of like EPA rollbacks. Strangely enough, the EPA new administrator Lee Zeldin is from Long Island, which is one of the just worst places in terms of climate change impacts, given their coastal environment in the United States.
Yeah.
So it's just really hypocritical for him to turn his back on his own constituents. But I'm not surprised. So that was a major one. Reconsidering like the Clean Power Plan, which just will regulate less power plants. So just giving them a free pass to emit more, which is a really scary action to take. And of course, defunding of agencies like Environmental Protection Agency, but also NOAA, which is mostly oceans focused, and just like slashing text about DEI and environmental justice from the EPA, and just unlawfully cutting contracts with people and organizations that they already have like written agreements with. And that's something that has affected us here in New Haven. There's 3 grants that the city of New Haven had got from the EPA that are all like basically terminated or in a weird hold limbo. One was going to be for installing geothermal in Union Station and really doing like an overhaul to the energy efficiency of that facility. And then like energy efficiency work for low income residents, and a major grant that had 20 partners in New Haven and gave them different sub-grants for all of these different nonprofits for them to fund staff and fund their critical work that has environmental co-benefits. So it just was months of work for the city and all of those partners that just was canceled, and people's salaries were in that major grant. So it's really scary. That was $20 million. But even other nonprofits in our city, including New Haven Climate Movement, we were part of a grant with headed by Common Ground High School, but also involved several other environmental nonprofit partners. The Green Jobs Corps program, which employed New Haven area high school students to intern at these organizations. And so since that had a focus on environmental justice and DEI, providing youth with jobs and, being able to give them experience and give them money for them to participate in these projects, having that cut was just a real wake-up call and really shook youth work in the city and environmental work. And a lot of those youth had to be laid off. So yeah, the effects hit really fast after January. So it's been scary even on a local level.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And like, Alyssa, when you were bringing up fracking, my brain went back to, I don't know if y'all remember, like years ago, they had those videos and they were going viral of people like turning on their faucets and lighting the water on fire. And like to show like how like contaminated the drinking water is, right? And every time I hear like Trump or his pundits talking about drill baby drill, or let's cut all of these regulations and roll them back, I'm like, y'all do realize they have less regulations in places like India and in places like all these other places around the world. And like, look at their water, look at their environment, like in the smog. And when you talk about even emission standards and regulations, there's some countries where when you get a car, you can only drive on certain days because the smog is too much. And it's like the reality of that is really hitting. Like, you do realize as you extract things from the earth, it's not like an unlimited supply. It's not just going to keep replenishing. And what are the impacts and the effects of the people who live in that area? Like we see what this looks like in other countries that don't have as many regulations, and we see how they have to live. There's places where they walk around with masks all the time because the air quality is just that bad. And it's like, that's where I feel like we're headed. And folks are just like happily going along for the ride and putting their foot on the acceleration and like, how do we get there faster?
I think the reality is that our time is running out for real sustainable change when it comes to climate justice. I think that the reality is, for so long we've been saying like, oh, we have 7 years to act. I think the reality is we have like 3. Like, our time is running out and really fast before we get to a point where natural disasters like the fires in LA, like the flooding in North Carolina, like Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, like these are just going to become our day-to-day norm if we don't actually begin to activate ourselves, activate our communities, and begin to fight for these corporations to be held accountable for the harm that they are causing to our communities, right? And the reality to all of this is that what is fueling the danger within our climate is these rich corporations that are looking to make a dollar, right?
Yeah.
And we know it's not just here in the US, but we know that at the same time our people are ready to resist. and organize, and just like their land extractions are global, so is our resistance, right?
Absolutely. And to your point, Alyssa, I think it's interesting how throughout like the past 50 years, the narrative and the messaging around climate justice or climate change has been pointed at individual people. And it's given this culture of it's on us, it's our fault that that it is this way, and that if we just recycle and if we just throw away our bottles in the right receptacles, that all of this will be fixed. And the reality is, if we all individuals we could all do that, and still it's these corporations that are pumping in gallons and gallons of pollutants into our drinking water, that are extracting natural gases that are causing these reactions in our atmosphere. And really, people are literally dying over these extractions, and a lot of times these are not safe things to do in a safe way. People are getting injured not only in the process of extracting these things, but also because the consequences of extracting these things are causing people their lives. When you look at places like in Arizona that have high cancer rates, we see it time and time again. And even generations after the soil has been tainted with all of these chemicals, people still can't plant there. People still can't drink the water there. It's beyond ridiculous.
Yeah. It's making us unsustainable in every sense of the word. Adrian, anything else you want to add to the conversation around rollbacks before we move on to our next part?
Yeah, I think I would just add that it's been really like strange and wild to see the conversation kind of evolve. Like a few years ago, like President Trump would say things like he does support things like clean air and clean water and like just, a healthy environment for Americans, but didn't, he never touched climate change. He was set that was a hoax, but he did have, somewhat positive views on clean air, clean water. But that's totally like hypocritical and opposite to these rollbacks and the drill baby drill mindset, and also just the audacity to declare like an energy emergency, which sounds like, well, yeah, we are in an emergency. We need to shift off of fossil fuels. But his version of energy emergency is we need more energy. So we need to rely on coal again and we need to drill. So just like creating these almost, false problems to support his corporate buddies, as you were mentioning, Alyssa, and just even being open about that and showing how his billionaire friends are making record profits. So it's really scary to see us shift again towards coal while falsely telling people that, we need more energy. We need to rely on fossil fuels again, instead of having this be a key time for us to shift off of it.
Yeah. Also, a message to the oligarchs who happen to be Trump's buddies that are funding this administration. I'm pretty sure y'all only made about 70% of the money that y'all lost after his imposed tariffs. So maybe that's not the best place to be investing your money. Just saying.
Right. And Adrian, to your point, like this is like really, if there's an emergency, this is the perfect time to really invest in natural ways of making energy. And I think back, like my brain always goes to whenever I think of like natural ways, like that water wheel, like old school, like creating energy. But it's just like energy is so natural, like our bodies, right? We have energy in our bodies. And it's just like, when you think of that, nature creates energy, the sun creates energy, like there's energy all around us. And how beautiful could it be if we can harness that? How intellectual, right, could that be, to be able to harness just like the natural energy that exists in nature and just within us? But the fact that like we stray away from that is just crazy.
Say to me, what's been most concerning the last 3 months has been how Democrats have not pushed back, and very little pushback, to be clear, right? I think to me that is really concerning because, one, we know that as a whole, Democrats have not been 100% when it comes to climate justice, right? We talk about people like Senator Fetterman. You talk about former Senator Kristen Sinema from Arizona, right? These were all folks who ran on very progressive agendas, and that's how they won the youth votes in their state. And then they got into office and completely forgot about their campaign promises. Democrats have been doing that a lot lately. And I think the reality is if the Democrats continue to bow down to Trump, we're only going to see more rollbacks than what we've seen so far. And I think what Trump has made clear is that there is a clear commitment on his end from his administration to destroy our climate.
Right. And to your point, Alyssa, this is why it's never been about party. Right. We understand that, to your point, right? Folks say what they need to say to get into office, and then they have their own agenda. This is really about people power. When we want to see movement, we need movement, right? We cannot rely on Democrat versus Republican. Those things don't matter. They're all about getting their money. They all have people who are funding their campaigns. They all have interests and special interests. And a lot of times those interests are against what their constituents really need, and really put them in office for.
Right. I think one of the more sort of clear examples that we could draw on where we talk about the impacts of U.S. policy on climate. So we're going to move on to talk a bit about Puerto Rico, talk about the environmental impacts of colonization and colonialism and how that has really torn up the island. For our viewers, I'll be doing a lot of talking here. Hope you like my voice.
We do.
Yes, cool. Listen.
So Puerto Rico, as we know it at the moment, sadly, is a U.S. colony. Sadly, we are tied to this country. But the reality is that we suffer from a very clear environmental colonialism, right? We're talking about the exploitation of our land, the underinvestment in infrastructure, and limited self-determination for the island. We're also talking about environmental decisions that are made far from the island and often prioritize mainland profit over local Puerto Ricans, right? I mean, Trump, when he announced the rollbacks around the EPA and the expansions of fracking contracts, the very next day, the Puerto Rican governor wrote a letter to Trump requesting that somehow fracking begin on the island. And what we know is that this will cause irreversible harm to the island, right? But also, let's not surprise, like the governor of Puerto Rico is a Republican. Yeah, there's a lot to say around Puerto Rico's current governor, right? And just the lack of stuff that she actually, well, honestly, this is also a woman, let's remember, whose administration has publicly said that they envision a Puerto Rico without Puerto Ricans, right? So
what?
Yes, on record. So the next part to this part is, right, there is a big project right now.
Listen, you can't just say that and then move on.
It's connected. I'm not moving on. I got you.
Okay.
Right. So part of this plan, one, to really break apart our environment, but two, to also displace hundreds of Puerto Ricans and thousands of Puerto Ricans, is a project called Proyecto Esencia in Cabo Rojo, which is this luxury mega project that we know is threatening our environment and the community of Cabo Rojo. This is a $2 billion resort-style housing development with a private airport, private hotels.
Yeah, giving Trump Gaza.
It's marketed to wealthy foreigners under Act 60, which is the tax incentive law. We just seen 2 days ago a man in Florida get held accountable by Florida Supreme Court because of tax evasion and purposefully using this tax incentive in Puerto Rico to avoid paying over $80 million in profit gains. I hope that we continue to pay attention to these folks that are using Puerto Rico as a tax haven, right? This site is being built on an area that includes ecological protected lands. It includes endangered species habitats like manatees, sea turtles, rare birds, and over 100 Taino archaeological sites. The risks
Are they
that have
just going to destroy that stuff? Or are they going to try to capitalize on it and make it into a museum?
destroy. There is no plan to protect the area. Mind you, a lot of these endangered species habitats are often what protect the island when hurricanes come in, right? And we know how hard Puerto Rico has been hit previously by hurricanes. So it's really concerning, specifically in this area of Cabo Rojo, to be doing away with all of the things that nature has provided to us to protect us from natural disasters. Um, Right. And a lot of the reports that have come out have shown that the project will uh, create water shortages. It will be an infrastructure overload for the area where it's being built on. It's being built directly next to the beach. They are concerns about beach erosions and land erosions, and the possibility of seismic activity, right? And most importantly, what we're seeing become sort of common is the privatization of beaches in Puerto Rico, right? And we know that, as we say in Puerto Rico, las playas son del pueblo, the beaches belong to the people, right? But we have people like Logan Paul, is that his name? The YouTuber? We have
Yeah.
people like Logan Paul buying property in Dorado. And while beaches legally in Puerto Rico cannot be privatized, these people have bought up so much land near the beaches that there is no public access to the beach. And the only way to get to the beach in that area is climbing over a bunch of rocks and making a 1 mile long journey to access water. Water. Like, we're talking about water here.
No,
Which
and a
is
lot of these gated communities that are being built where like a lot of folks have Airbnbs where you can no longer access the beach because you have to go through this gated community with security. They're not letting you in.
which is illegal. Illegal. Let's
And
just
who is holding these people accountable?
nobody. And I think what's sad is this is where what the current governor's administration sort of comes into play with this whole idea of a Puerto Rico without Puerto Ricans, right? And also, this is where we see Bad Bunny's latest project, a musical project, come into play with his song "What Happened in Hawaii," because what we're seeing happening in Puerto Rico right now is the same thing that we've seen happen in Hawaii as
Guam.
these folks were sort of trying to push Hawaii to become the 50th state, right? I think it is concerning, highly concerning. I mean, there's even videos of areas in Condado, which is this other rich part of Puerto Rico, where the white folks who are invading, let's be very clear, our land, have literally been yelling at Puerto Ricans to get off the beach, to lower their musics, to leave. But this is where we see the resilience of us as people, where people the next day have shown up with like 40 other people, and now we want to
Let's
see
go.
who kick all of us up, right? Because the beaches, again, belong to the people. Um, but what we have seen historically is this neglect from the U.S. When it comes to Puerto Ricans, right? We talk about Hurricane Maria in 2017, right? And that was the longest blackout in U.S. history, right? And what we know is that the federal response was terrible to Hurricane Maria, right? And was condemned because of the delays and inadequate response, right? Between 2015 to 2018, we had over 97% of Puerto Ricans that received drinking water from systems that were violating federal standards for clean water, right? We talk about Vieques, which is a smaller island that's a part of Puerto Rico, but right off the side of Puerto Rico, and how it was used as a bombing range for over 60 years by the U.S. Navy, And this elevated cancer rates in the area. The cleanup to this was incredibly slow. I'm talking about over 10 to 20 years to clean up the toxic waste that was created by this makeshift bombing range that the US Navy put together. Mind you, people were still living on the island of Vieques. It wasn't like it was an abandoned island. There was actual Puerto Ricans that were living there, and there was hundreds of Puerto Ricans that were displaced because of the brutal takeover of the US government when it came to Vieques, right? And lastly, right, the EPA enforcement and disaster preparedness in Puerto Rico has been historically underfunded compared to other US states. And I'm gonna pause there so y'all could jump in. We go talk a bit about what I shared.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alyssa,
Girl, you said
for
a lot.
all of that information and also for comparing the ties as well to Hawaii. That's been something that I've been seeing a lot on social media in terms of like Native Hawaiians saying like, please stop vacationing here. You know, it's hurting our water supply, it's hurting our biodiversity, and it's contributing to, yeah, that just like overstepping, even, you know, more overstepping than the environmental colonialism of it in the first place. And seeing those parallels between Puerto Rico and Hawaii are just like really, you know, terrifying tales that are playing out at the same time. And also why self-determination, I feel, is so important as a piece of climate justice, and also just like tying it back like globally. Indigenous people worldwide conserve 80% of the world's biodiversity. So by giving land back to the original stewards, that inherently is both good, like socially and for human rights, but also for the environment and protecting biodiversity. And even that conversation about resorts and hotels also kind of rung an alarm in my head about the Gaza Strip and intentions by the Israeli government and even interest by the United States to basically transform the Gaza Strip as well into things like resorts and taking advantage of that waterfront and that beach, and thinking about how yeah, these historic injustices are playing out in real time in these three places and are heightening like harmful tourism and colonialism all in one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anything to add, Timo?
No, you said it all.
Okay, cool. So I will move us to the next segment, right? We're going to talk a bit about global extraction, war, borders, and what could be the potential climate collapse, right? Um, I am going to pass it to Timo to lead us through this section.
Yes. So yeah, I think we have. I mean, historically, we've seen globally the impacts of not only, you know, wars, but the impacts of the bombings of test, like between testing and science and all of these other things that are associated with war, right? And so I think that the main one that we really, when folks think about that, they think of Japan, like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the nuclear weapons that were dropped over there. And even thinking about like the nuclear testing sites here in America, out west in like Arizona and Texas area, you have stories of folks, even generations after, that are being born with like birth defects and cancer. And folks that are now living on that land that have higher risks of cancer. There's places in Japan that you still can't really go to because the environment still has so much hazardous waste and pollution in the air. And what you were talking about, Adrian, thinking about the war in Gaza right now and the direct impacts, even bombs that are not nuclear bombs, they all have some type of chemical waste that, and I think when we forget, when we drop bombs in different areas, the United States is not going over there, picking up the shards and be like, my bad, let me go clean this mess up. Like none of that is happening. So all of the contaminants, all of the chemicals that it takes to make these bombs are all seeping into the earth, with which there impacts the water systems, the irrigation systems, the ability to be able to plant food and crops and be able to eat the fish and the plant life in that area. And so it really has so many different impacts, not only on the environment, but on the population of folks living there. A lot of folks end up having to leave. Folks are born again with defects. And so I think when I watch what's going on right now in Gaza, I think of the impacts of the folks that are living there, right? The babies that are being born right now. And also like the earth, what's happening in, and thinking about what Alyssa was talking about when it rains, all the impacts. If you bomb all the trees and then it rains, there's going to be floods, and folks are going to die. And I think folks really don't think about some of those things when we talk about not only war, but like the aftermath of war, like the impacts of war, like 10, 20, 30, 40 years after that, and the displacement of war. And I think when you were talking about the Trump Gaza, right, like wanting to turn it into a resort, how are they going to do that with all of this pollutants in the earth? How are they going to be able to grow things there, to have people there and drink the water? I think of places even in Africa where water, you can't just go access water. Water has become like it's privatized, and we do not have just natural access to water. And so how far away are we from there, and how many places are we making like that? You want to add anything, Adrian?
Yeah, absolutely. You raised so many important points. I'll touch on the last point you made, and then I'll circle back in terms of, it's so scary also seeing how militarized zones will like cut off access to, basic human needs such as water, and also in the context of Gaza and the West Bank, combining that with like the surveillance state and, arrests that can happen at any time. So there's both the justice complication, but also like the environmental justice implication of, just cutting off access to water, to beaches, to a healthy environment. And so I'll just share a few statistics about like warfare and climate, because it's been an issue that I've been really interested in ever since I got involved with the City of New Haven Peace Commission. Sending my love if any of them are watching this, but they totally enriched my climate activism, I would say, by introducing me to the justice implications from the military side. So overall, our U.S. Department of Defense is the world's largest institutional user of petroleum, and our U.S. military produces 59 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions annually, which is more than entire countries like Sweden. And of course, our operations for the military require significant investment in carbon-intensive infrastructure. And in terms of the imperialism and colonialist aspect of it, there are 800 U.S. military bases in 90 countries and territories across the globe. And overall warfare from 2001 to the 2020s has emitted 1.2 billion tons of greenhouse gases from just the U.S. military. And as you were mentioning, also the threat of nuclear war is even more scary, even more harmful, and would just totally be devastating. And honestly, like, it's scary that, these could be used at any time. Political relations could escalate at any point. We have U.S. owned nuclear weapons that are in storage units, like 24/7 surveilled, but one mistake could be made. And there could be millions of tons of soot that go up in the air, block sunlight, totally like change the climate of the world, cause famine. So nuclear war is like a whole nother can of worms in itself. And also you mentioned like environmental health impacts. Like there are still people right now in New Mexico that are struggling 80 years later from atomic weapons testing in New Mexico, and uranium mining that right now can't be eligible to be compensated anymore by the US government because the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act expired last year. So there's just like generational environmental health impacts, and that's even worse abroad where there's like no like US accountability to solve those issues. And of course, the more that we have this militarism now, like, and climate chaos that arises from that will displace people, militarize borders further, cause more unrest, and it's just a cycle that continues on. So we need to break it.
Mm-hmm. Before I go into, I have a lot here to say, but before that, I just want to say Flint, Michigan to this day does not have clean water.
Yes.
Just to be clear, and it has been over a decade at this point that Flint, Michigan has been fighting for clean water, but just felt very fitting in this conversation about climate to address that quickly. But as we talk about the impacts of war and what's happening in the genocide in Gaza, right, we can talk about how the Israeli military is really using ecocide as a weapon of war, right? What we know is that the Israeli military's assault on Gaza has created one of the most severe humanitarian and environmental disasters in the world to this date. Since October 23, Israel has relentlessly bombarded and damaged critical infrastructure in Gaza, like water systems, sanitation facilities, uh, and agriculture, right? We talk about the destruction of Gaza's wastewater management system that has led to raw sewage being dumped into the Mediterranean Sea, contaminating water sources and harming the marine ecosystems. We talk about Gaza's agricultural land that has been decimated by airstrikes and bulldozing, while forests, olive groves, and greenhouses have been flattened completely. And we know that the use of explosive weapons and white phosphorus not only harms civilians, but pollutes air, soil, and water, what many Palestinians and international advocates are calling environmental warfare, right? And we talk about the Ukraine and how Russia attempted to bomb the Chernobyl nuclear plant and the dangers of that, and how that could really harm our ecosystem, right? Uh, More globally, right? What we know is that the global north, and we're talking about the US, Canada, and the EU, and other wealthy nations, are responsible for over 90% of historical carbon emissions, yet global south nations bear the brunt of climate change impacts, right? We're talking about countries in Africa, the Caribbean, and the Middle East, and South Asia that face constant floods, droughts, and extreme weather, while receiving a fraction of the climate financing that has been promised by the global north.
Mm-hmm.
And the US military is the largest institutional polluter on earth, to be clear.
Mm-hmm. No, and you see a clear connection between, right, ecocide and capitalism, where you see this common theme of the global north benefiting and also at the same time imposing the consequences of their actions onto the global south, right? Where we see places where folks are working at less than minimum wage, practically slavery, so that we can have nice clothes and iPhones, right? Where we can send our pollutants to places so we can have like the medications that we want. Like, I don't think people realize like how much pollutants it creates for this fast fashion, for medications, for all the things and the technologies that we even use come from the ground. And how they have direct impacts to the environment. And that's why I go back to like all of these cuts of the EPA, because that reality I don't think has sunk in for most people in America. When they think about all of the things that you use in your daily life, those things are created in countries who do not have these regulations, and they're dumping all of the pollutants and the runoffs into their water, into their environment. And so once folks start feeling, right, the consequences of these cutbacks. And by folks, I mean people of color have felt this for decades and generations. But when the folks in power start feeling these things, and folks who normally sit out of these conversations start feeling the effects, they'll have a different story to tell.
I think sadly by then it will be too late, right? We're talking about
Yeah.
like the need to act right now, right? Like we don't have another 5, 10 years to put
Oh
a plan
no.
together and act, right? Like what we're seeing is a genuine climate emergency that requires an immediate response, right? And what we know is that climate justice requires demilitarization. It requires the end of capitalism. Climate justice
Yep.
requires the need for decolonization, right? So when we're talking about from Gaza to Puerto Rico, from Sudan to Brazil, from India to South Africa, right? What we're talking about is the need for the interconnectedness of our climate change movements, right? What's happening in the US impacts folks globally, what's happening in the world impacts us here at home, right? But we need to learn that our movements are interconnected.
Like this background, it's climate justice is human justice, right? We cannot, and it's all interconnected, and it's a multi-pronged situation, which really we need multi-pronged solutions. Which, to your point, Alyssa, if we all can gather together globally, right, we can gain a better understanding of what folks need and how, just to your point, right, the moves that we make here in the US will directly impact folks in different continents globally. So how do we move here so that it positively impacts folks in different ways?
And like the reality is the forces that we are fighting at Citywide Youth Coalition, because they're destroying our communities, are no different than the forces that Adrian and our friends at New Haven Climate Change Movement are fighting, because they're destroying our climate. Right? We're fighting the same people, and it requires this cross-class solidarity.
Yeah, like when you in New Haven, we have our asthma rate is higher than the state's average. When we have buildings that have mold, and we have mega landlords that don't take care of their apartments that produce mold, the air quality, because we're living on top of each other, and we don't have good public transportation and good bike lanes for folks to be able to have alternate ways of getting to where they need to go, and we don't have walkable cities, right? That directly impacts us. But we know folks that live in low income areas, that's their reality. Mm-hmm. Right. And so all of these things directly impact them. And we know if there's a natural disaster, those of us who live in low income areas are not going to get the help that we need and desire, and probably and need more than folks in those other areas who are going to get them first.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that also just ties back to the sheer number of people who are living from paycheck to paycheck. So then imagine like, a hurricane hits, like these people who are living paycheck to paycheck or low income, just like one disaster, one thing that goes wrong can make them homeless. It's not something that is easy to recover from, versus people with higher incomes, maybe even second homes, they can just say goodbye and, move and start over, versus the rest of us, have to try to rebuild and hope that insurance will cover things. And there's just a total different reality for how we can adapt to climate disasters that are, pretty much locked in to happen in the next few decades because we did not take action in time.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, even like about affordable housing, and even thinking about mega landlords, because if you rent and God forbid there's a natural disaster and that home is destroyed, it is not your choice whether or not it gets rebuilt or not. And if you don't have renter's insurance, which I know I've never had renter's insurance, right? And in New Haven, it's not required. Like, what happens? What do you do if you don't have access to affordable housing? How much harder is it for you to find a new place to live?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think there is so much here, right? Even when we're talking about New Haven, I think about the study that had came out a couple of years back around the impacts of the police shooting range in the Dixwell neighborhood, and the runoff and residue of those bullets getting into the local water system. So, like, also, why we should abolish the police. But I think issues are so interconnected. They are literally all one. Right? But what Adrian was speaking on, the reality of natural disasters becoming more common if we fail to act. The Puerto Rican government just released a report 2 weeks ago about how what we can expect in this hurricane season in Puerto Rico, which is from June to November, if I'm not mistaken, is a minimum of a strong Category 3 hurricane, right? Now, let's look at 2 years ago when Puerto Rico got hit with a Category 1 hurricane, which was Hurricane Irma, right? Puerto Rico could barely recover right after, and in a quick recovery, right? It took 2 weeks or more for people to receive electricity because we know the electrical grid in Puerto Rico is a disaster right now, right? So if a category 1 hurricane could devastate the island like that, I can only imagine what a category 3 will do, right? And sadly the reality is what we have to look at is, are we expecting another Hurricane Maria situation in Puerto Rico this hurricane season, right? And what makes this even more worse is that the electrical company just came out and said that Puerto Ricans can expect to lose powers 7 times more this summer than in previous years.
That's crazy. And the number is already high to begin with.
Yesterday alone, over 100,000 Puerto Ricans on the island had no electricity. And we're not even talking about actual summertime yet, when those numbers are expected to multiply by 7. Sorry.
Right? And don't let it be in the dead of summer, hot as heck, and you have no, like, that's folks' lives. God forbid, elderly, children, like.
Yeah, and there's that also insidious cycle of like major insurance companies just like refusing now to insure certain areas because they know it's risky because of climate change. And but then they're also in their own investments, they're helping, pad the pockets of fossil fuel industry. So it's just this crazy cycle of just like, yeah, you're not supporting the people that need the insurance because of climate change, but then you're also helping fuel climate change. And yeah, just making it so much harder for people to live and to adapt and just not become displaced, which is, of course, the last resort of what someone would want to do.
Yeah. And it's really a good example, Adrian, to your point, that the system's not broken. The system works the way that it was designed to work, that you can create the problem and also benefit from the problem. And as you're talking, I'm like, do we need ACA for property insurance? Where because we saw it with the fires, right, in California, where you had folks, they knew this was coming and they pulled out right before, and they canceled insurance right before it happened. They knew exactly what they were doing, but because there is no law that says that they cannot do that, or there's no mechanism to hold them accountable for this behavior, is an issue. But again, working the way it's supposed to be working.
Yeah, when we talk about corporate greed and climate disasters, I mean, we've heard of so many insurance companies in Florida refusing to provide insurance to homeowners in areas like Miami, right? But even when we talk about the recent fires in LA, I think one of the more shocking stuff was hearing what's the governor's name there? The one who everybody thinks he's running for office in 2028.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I know his name, but I keep forgetting. Hold on, I'm gonna look it up.
That guy. Gavin Newsom. Sorry, there we go. Newsom. Where the governor was talking about there was a lack of water to put the fires out, right? And then you have billionaires like Stuart and Linda Resnick, who own over 57% of ground water storage facilities in LA. We're talking about 500 billion gallons of water that are privately owned. To me, the fact that water is privately owned anywhere is so crazy to me.
But there's places around the world where it's privately owned, and like folks were like, "Oh, that's never going to happen in America." It already is.
Now, I want to pass the stage over to Adrian to talk a bit about any call to actions that you may have as we get ready to close this conversation. Where do you see our community being able to most engage in climate change work here locally? How could folks become members of New Haven climate change movements? For other organizations who might be watching, how could we best support the work that you all are doing?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So we, especially in New Haven Climate Movement, prioritize youth voices. So we're predominantly high school and college students, but we very much welcome adult volunteers as well. Very simple to get involved. Shoot us an email at newhavenclimatemovement@gmail.com or message us on Instagram or Facebook. Same username is New Haven Climate Movement. So we would love if you could engage with us, come to any of our upcoming actions. We just had a small climate rally last Friday in observance of the Global Strike Day for climate change on April 11th. And then going forward for the rest of the month, we have a few events coming up as well. On Wednesday at 5:30, we're having a joint conversation between New Haven Rising, Sunrise New Haven, and us, New Haven Climate Movement. And we're going to be talking about environmental justice, economic justice, labor justice, and kind of linking our work, building coalitions, and also strategizing for New Haven Rising's relaunch of the Yale Respect New Haven campaign. Some of you listening might remember that it was really big a few years ago, and it's ready to relaunch again with the new Yale administration to call for a bigger investment in New Haven by Yale, and maybe also intertwining some of these demands for how Yale can invest in these causes like climate change, for example. So we have that conversation coming up Wednesday, 5:30 at the New Haven People's Center. And additionally, on the 26th, we as New Haven Leon Sister City Project are going to be part of the Rock to Rock Earth Day bike ride. So this is more community building than activism, but I wanted to mention it because it fundraises for 19 different environmental organizations in New Haven. So it's a really important event and campaign overall to fundraise for the important work happening in the community. So if you're willing to, you can register at rocktorock.org. Registration starts at $10. And we also encourage people to fundraise peer-to-peer if they would like for an organization of their choice. So that would be super helpful. And you can support New Haven Climate Movement through that operation. And lastly, on April 30th, which is a Wednesday, several NHCM members are going to be testifying for the New Haven Board of Alders Finance Committee hearing. We've been going to several of these because it is city budget season, and just testifying that we need more city funding to go towards climate projects. Obviously, there are so many immediate needs for the city that are going to be put in the budget, but we want to be the voice to make sure that we're thinking long-term and that there's money in the annual budget to take action on climate and making our voices heard on that. So we hope you will join us anytime this month and follow us on our social media and get on our newsletter.
Thank you so much, Adrian, for joining us as a guest during this conversation. It has been an honor to have you and have this very important conversation. To our listeners and those who will watch this later on, the month of May, we will be focusing on a world without borders, where we will discuss everything from immigration advocacy to the importance of imagining a world that does not have borders and a more inclusive and welcoming society. But I want to close with saying that environmental justice isn't just about saving the planet. It is about saving each other, from Gaza to Puerto Rico, from the global south to our own neighborhoods here at home. Our liberation is rooted in the land, in resistance, and in the refusal to let borders, bombs, or billionaires decide our future. Until we are all free, the fight continues and must continue. So I encourage you all to connect to your community organizations, especially during this time, whether it's at New Haven Climate Change Movement, Sunrise New Haven, so many other organizations, CTDSA, Peer Pride, of course, the Citywide Youth Coalition. But the important thing is that we are building community and building people power together.
Right. And I would just like to add, thank you all for watching. And if you're going to come back to this, if you're not live, thank you very much. Please leave comments. If you're watching this on Instagram or Facebook, We have a YouTube channel now. Yay. So if you miss any old episodes, please join us on YouTube. We're going to have some clips up there. Like, subscribe, so you know whenever we're going to have a live coming up, you will be notified. But yeah, it is Citywide Youth over on YouTube. So please join us over there as well. And if you are on Instagram and would love to be a part of the conversation, join us on YouTube over there so we can read your comments.
Awesome.
Yay. Thank you so much for having me. It was a delight to be part of this conversation with you both. And thank you to our viewers. And yeah, it was so great to speak with you all about this important topic as we are in Earth Month. So I loved having this intersectional conversation with you both.
Right. And wherever you are, do something with an organization this month for Earth Month, whether it's on Earth Day or the last day of the month. Get out, do something that really touches on environment, on climate justice.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you in the next episode of Blueprints for Freedom. Goodbye.